Okay, we are going to discuss the laws of Shabbat in a historical perspective, meaning we are going to look at what do we have in the Torah and how did people observe the laws of Shabbat at the time of the Mishnah, of the rabbis, which is around 100, 200 years before the Common Era, and how they became to be written in the Mishnah in the 2nd century, and then later on interpreted in the Talmud. Now, why is it important? Because we have, for observant Jews, there are many challenges in being observant. It could be challenges of kashrut, education, choosing where to live. But I think one of the most difficult areas is the area of Shabbat. There are many. It has many ramifications. It affects all these things. When people choose a school, they want to know that it's the school that will not. If not a Jewish school, they say they cannot afford it, but they want to know that it is a school that will not schedule activities on Shabbat. When they choose where to live, they want to live within the eruv, within the tchum where they can walk to the synagogue. When conducting business, they need to know that they could work with people who will not work on Shabbat, etc. But especially today, it is becoming more and more difficult because of globalism, the way we communicate, the way we mobilize. People, when the halachot were written, people didn't think of the possibility of being in one time zone today and another time zone tomorrow, and going back. I know people who conduct business in the Far East and try to come back home for Shabbat every Shabbat, and it's a burden for them. And this is for to be with the family.
But the Far East every Shabbat.
From the Far East, they go and they could travel back. It's crazy, yes. But then speak about technology. It started with television and computers, and then handheld devices, and now voice-activated devices, and now you can get Amazon Home or Echo or Alexa everywhere. What do you do with that? So there are a lot of problems. So here it's extremely important to understand, to separate the idea of the spirit of Shabbat from the laws of Shabbat. The spirit of Shabbat, in general, when we just think of what the importance of Shabbat is, it's unquestionable that this is the most important gift given to the Jewish people. And this is how it is described in the Torah, when in the book of Exodus, in Shemot, when Hashem speaks about the manna, and the people were given the manna every day, except for when Friday they got double, and they didn't know what is going on. They come to Moshe. Moshe says, Re'u ki Adonai natan lachem et Shabbat. Have in mind that Hashem gave you a gift called Shabbat. It is a gift because it allows us to detox, to relax, to put everything aside. Today, there are different organizations. It started as hotels that would charge thousands of dollars for a weekend without internet. I mean, even if you bring your phone, there's no internet. Now, I think that even if they wanted to do that, it's almost impossible to have a place on earth, unless you go to really remote rural areas. But here in the United States, to find a place that would have no service is impossible. So there are detox camps, digital detox, where people go for a week or a weekend of activities where they're not allowed to have, meaning it's physically, they cannot bring any device that has connectivity, no laptops, no Fitbits, no watches, or anything like that, and they pay good money for that. Meanwhile, if one observes the Shabbat correctly, you have this detox, digital detox every week, every 6 days. You have 1 day to take off. You can be with the family. You have quality time. But with all that, now, on one hand, this is like the benefit and the advantage that Shabbat gives us. But when you look at all the detailed laws of Shabbat, just recently, if you look at the literature, there Yalkut Yosef by the son of Haim Ovadia Yosef, 5 volumes on Shabbat. There's a book called Menuchat Ava by Rabbi Moshe Levi, 3 volumes on Shabbat. The Shmirat Shabbat K'Ilchata by Rabbi Neuwirth and all the commentaries on that. I think you could easily count hundreds, just in the 20th century, hundreds of books on Shabbat. So the average person when he looks at all that, is paralyzed. So what am I allowed to do? How can I move in this direction, in that direction? There are so many laws that are related just to eating. Preparing food on Shabbat. There's one law that if you put salt on cucumbers, it might be considered pickling. And you cannot pickle on Shabbat because it's like cooking. You cannot squeeze lemons or oranges, or what is the difference between squeezing lemons, which are used only and as an additive, and oranges, which are used for juice, and olives and grapes, which are the classic fruits that where juice was extracted from. Then there's the question of separating the edible from the non-edible. Can you do it with your hands, with a sieve, with the filter? Some people don't drink water from the tap on Shabbat because they are filtered. They say you're not allowed to filter on Shabbat, so they will have bottled water. So, and I think I mentioned before, people are sometimes, because they're not sure of how to do a certain thing, decide not to do it on Shabbat. There's one example is someone who spent time in yeshiva, he doesn't drink tea on Shabbat because there are different opinions on how to make tea. First you put the water, then the bag. Maybe a bag is not good because you're filtering water through the bag, so you have to use leaves. If you put leaves, you're coloring the water. So what comes first? You have to use a third vessel. You pass from the first one to the second one, the third one, and then it's not cooking. So he doesn't drink tea on Shabbat. So why do you spend all these years in yeshiva if you don't know how to make a cup of tea for yourself on Shabbat? Avoiding something is not an option. And I had myself a situation where in my shul in LA, I went to the hall to make a cup of tea, and a kid, 12 years old, tells me,
nothing.
No, he says, you cannot do this on Shabbat. I said, which school do you go to? He told me. I said, who's your rabbi? He told me the name. I said, go ask your rabbi if it's appropriate to tell a rabbi that what he's doing is forbidden on Shabbat.
That was good.
And not giving him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
But this is or you have a situation of someone, there's also a true story, who went into the bathroom on Shabbat in a hotel and then realized that it's automatic flush. And then if he moves away from, so he stands and he knows that. Yeah, so it happens once, but now when you open even if it happens once, when you open the door and you go out, it will flush again. So he stayed in the stall the whole Shabbat to the side, not interfering with.
So he didn't pee.
No, he didn't. But he, after that, he realized he got locked in the bathroom the whole Shabbat. What kind of honest Shabbat is that? But he thinks that is the right thing to do.
What's the halacha with
all automatic stuff like that. Not really a problem. Not really a problem. If you want to do it, if you want to avoid it, it's fine. But if you have no choice, in most now in most hotels, you don't have a mechanical faucet or soap dispenser. So now you'll have to have separate hotels for observing people, non-observing. They already have the problem with the keys. There's many problems. There's a story about a great rabbi who, in his youth, he lived in Russia and he served in the army. Everybody was drafted, and when it was his turn to be the guard, he had a guard shift. It was on Shabbat. They only had one coat for the guard, one heavy coat for the guard, and the other coat they sold to get vodka. So probably, so he came over, and the guy before him hung the coat on a tree for him, and he debated whether you're allowed to take it off the tree, or it will transgress the prohibition of using a tree on Shabbat, which is rabbinical. So he said, I can still survive. He finally survived until the morning. I mean, thank God it didn't die because of that. And he lived to a long life. But the story is told, and some people think this is the right thing to do. And it's not, because he put himself in danger for a questionable facet of the law. Or last story of a teacher who took his students in New York to a trip. They were supposed to get to their destination before Shabbat. They got stuck in a snowstorm, and everybody went off the bus and walked for 3 hours And they say it's a miracle that they made it to a safe place. It's not a miracle; it's utter stupidity on behalf of the teacher that should have told the bus driver whether it was Jewish or not to keep driving because they put them at risk. But there are extremes. But this is where people really get into complicated situations, and not always they can find out in advance or on the spot what to do. So it's extremely important to really look at the history and development of the halachot. So let us start from the Torah. What do we have in the Torah in terms of Shabbat? The Torah, given by God, it's a divine law. God knows that we have the tendency to dig into everything, especially when it's not only legal but also religious, and break it into details. If you tell me, for example, when you eat bread, you have to say Birkat Hamazon, I will want to know how much bread, what is called bread, how do I eat it, where do I eat it, what is the text of the bracha, right? All those details we need to know. So the Torah didn't write too many details. The Torah wrote very vaguely. Then and Rambam, Maimonides, when he wrote his Mishneh Torah, his Codex of the Halachot, and as he does in the introduction to each theme before Hilchot Shabbat, he writes what are the commandments that are related to this theme in the Torah. He wanted people to have perspective, that the laws of sacrifices. How many laws of sacrifices are in the Torah in general? He lists them, and then he goes into the details as were worked by the rabbis for thousands of years. So here's what he says in the introduction to Hilchot Shabbat. Yesh bichlalam hamesh mitzvot. Of all the references of the Torah to Shabbat, there are 5 commandments. 2 of them are what I would call active commandments. People call positive, what I call mitzvot aseh. Active commandments of something that you have to do. And there are 3 prohibitions. 3 actions that you have to avoid. What are they? Vezeu pratan. Lishbot b'shevi'i shelo la'asot bo melacha. Lishbot b'shevi'i shelo la'asot bo melacha. There are 2 facets, 2 sides of the same coin. There is a positive, there's an active commandment to rest, to cease from work on the 7th day. And there's a commandment not to do work. So it's just if you don't do work, you win 2 medals, one for not working and one for resting, right? But there are 2 sides of the same coin. Then shelo la'anosh b'Shabbat, not to apply a punishment on Shabbat. That is a warning that goes to Bedin. It doesn't even apply to the regular person. The Bedin, after they decided, they determined the verdict for a person, and they decided that this person either deserves corporal punishment, lashes, or he has to be executed. This cannot be done on Shabbat. So take this out because it doesn't apply to us. It only leaves 4 mitzvot that the Torah says that are applicable to us: to rest, to not work. What is the 4th one? Shelo latzet chutz lagevul b'Shabbat, not to walk out of Shabbat boundary on Shabbat. And this is something that is defined by the territory of the city, which for most of us where we live today is not applicable, because it means that you walk about a mile outside the city. Most of us where we live, you could walk for days and not get to the edge of the city. Everything is connected. You could walk from here to DC 3-4 hours and you will go through residential areas. So you can't really do that. But anyway, this is the 4th mitzvah in the Torah. And finally, lekadesh hayom bizchira, to sanctify or distinguish the day of Shabbat by words, not even with wine. So the biblical commandment is to say Hayom Shabbat, which we say Baruch Ata Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. When we say it on the Amidah of Arvit, we fulfill that. So very little in the Torah. Again, 5 mitzvot: to cease from work, not to work, not to apply punishment by the court on Shabbat, not to go beyond the territory on Shabbat, and to sanctify the day by mentioning it, just saying Mekadesh Shabbat. So now you go from that, like basically only you have 5 types of work, into the Mishnah, and the Mishnah lists how many? 39. The Mishnah calls it 40 haser achat, 40 minus 1. There are 40 types of work on Shabbat. And you ask, where did this come from? Where did the list come from? So later on, we'll get to the point where people associate the list of the works that are forbidden on Shabbat with the Mishkan, with the temple, or not the temple, the tabernacle, the Mishkan in the desert. But they say it's not as people think that it has to do with the work that was performed on a regular basis in the Mishkan, but rather the work that was needed for the construction of the temple. But there are a lot of problems with this explanation, and I will get to them later. But before we get into details, I want to tell you what is the theory that I'm going to present. This I've learned from my professor in Bar Ilan, Rabbi Professor Yitzhak Gilat. And his approach is that he explains that at the time of the Torah, like I said, there was a general prohibition of not doing work on Shabbat, and the Torah didn't go into specifics. Now, some halachot were understood as people knew from the way they are described in the Torah. The Torah says, "B'harish uvakatzir tishbot." It gives an example of plowing and harvesting. It speaks about lighting fire. It's not counted by Maimonides as a mitzvah because it is mentioned in the Torah as a subcategory. But there are certain things that everybody understood that you don't do on Shabbat. You don't engage in agriculture, and you don't light a fire. And that's it. What else did people have to do? They had a pretty simple life. If you're not in the field on Shabbat, and if you didn't cook, you go home and you rest. That's it. People were hard working. They didn't have to go to the gym. Gym was all week. Shabbat was just giving a break to your aching bones, literally. So that's it. It was not that complicated. But over time, and as we saw when we studied the book of Nehemiah and Yeshaya and Yirmiyahu, there were actually some breaches with keeping Shabbat. When they came back from Bavel, they under the guidance of Ezra and Nehemiah and other leaders who pushed them, really made this amanah, the covenant that they signed to keep Shabbat, and it was an active endeavor to get people to keep Shabbat. It became stronger and stronger. But then they went into the other side, which is they thought that any type of work is forbidden on Shabbat. So Shabbat, what is Shabbat? And there's also some Babylonian influence there, because the Bavlim, where they came from exile, they spent almost 70 years there and still had connections. They believed that the day of Shabbat is a dangerous day. In their calendar, the seventh day was a day of destruction. And it was associated with Shabbatai, with Saturn, that also they believed was a planet of destruction whenever it rises in the constellation. So Jews tried to avoid, after they came back from Bavel, and we know that up to the Greek period, they tried to avoid any type of work on Shabbat. Anything. So what do you do on Shabbat? You sit home. That's it. You don't even, according to some of them, you wouldn't even keep a fire burning on Shabbat. Not talking about lighting fire on Shabbat. You don't even leave a fire or anything kindled from before Shabbat. To the extent that they would eat cold food. Yeah. There no existing fire. So cold food on Shabbat. The rabbis later on wanted to change that mentality, and they put a very strong emphasis. They said you must eat hot food on Shabbat, even if you just drink.
Shomronim?
No, before the Shomronim. This is like the Karaites, but they were considered heretics. They said this is a heresy. You don't understand the Torah. The rabbi said you must at least have a cup of hot water on Shabbat. And the hot water in the language of the Mishnah is hamin. What we call today cholent or schena or dafina or hashwa or tibit, each in our native languages, was called in the word hamin didn't mean that. It meant hot water. I think I told you that a friend of mine who became Baal Teshuvah at a young age, a teenager, got confused with the word hamin because he studied the halachot of Shabbat, and he read that the halakha says you must wash your face and your feet with hamin before Shabbat. It meant hot water. And he went to his mom. She was making schena, so they were not shomer Shabbat, but they made the hamin. She was dafina, Tunisian, and he asked her for a little of the hamin. She says, "What for?" He says, "I need to wash your face." She started yelling at him, "You with your idiotic halachot and this word," and then he found out that was the thing. Anyway,
The rabbanim, especially they did this against the Karaite.
right. So they said,
Because Karaite says, "Lo lachamem Shabbat."
right, and because of that, the rabbi said, and Rabbi Zachariah Levi, Ba'al Maor from Gerona brings that he says. Kol mi she'eno ochel hamin, bodkin harav shema hu min. Like if one doesn't eat hamin on Shabbat, we have to investigate. Maybe this guy is a heretic. Is not Jewish. So that was the extreme. People didn't even eat hot food on Shabbat. But you know what? People could survive with cold food. There was a bigger problem, and that is they thought that observing Shabbat overrides saving a life. Because in their mind, you can't do anything. If someone is in a life-threatening situation, it's his problem. And we have it from sectarian Judaism, from the those who went to the Dead Sea, the Essenes, the Baitusim, and others who lived in the caves of Qumran. We have their halachic writings. They said if someone is in danger on Shabbat, let's say he fell into a pit. He broke a leg, is crying for help. You say, "I'm very sorry, we'll take you up. If you survive, we'll bring you up after Shabbat." Right? The rabbis, now when it really became a problem, you could know those were like isolated incidents. That was not very common. And also if someone was sick on Shabbat, it really didn't matter back then whether the doctor comes on Shabbat or not. Like the idea of emergency back then was completely different. Most people didn't have a chance if they had a serious disease. Even until not too recently, hospitals in the 19th century used to put the operation rooms in the upper floor to give the patient a chance to commit suicide. A lot of people, knowing that they're coming like amputation or anything that was so dangerous, was so painful, that people just chose to.
Where?
In Europe and all of that. So medicine has advanced a lot, but in the time of the Gemara, we didn't have a situation like, okay, you're going to save to be Mehalel Shabbat to save someone's life from what would be a possibility if there was fire or flooding or war coming. And here is where there was a problem. The Greeks found out during the war of the Maccabim. They found out that the Jews don't fight back on Shabbat. Those pious Jews who believe that you cannot do anything on Shabbat wouldn't fight back. So what do? They started attacking them on Shabbat. And after a couple of incidents, the rabbi said, "Okay, no, it's not working. Let us review the halachot. Let us sit and understand the law." And they said it doesn't make sense because that to sacrifice your life for Shabbat, because they found a word in the Torah, "Va'asher ya'aseh otam ha'adam v'chai b'hem." One should observe the mitzvot in order to live. And they said v'chai b'hem v'lo sheyamud b'hem. You should live through them and not die through them. And they also added another rationale: halel alav Shabbat achat kedei sheishmor Shabbatot harbeh. You're transgressing one Shabbat to save a person who could live many Shabbatot and bring people to the... Okay, all that. So that was a change. Now, after that shift, after they said, okay, we have to not go to an extreme. We cannot eat cold food on Shabbat. We cannot let people die on Shabbat. The rabbis, at around the 1st century, this is 300-400 years later, in an ongoing process, there was a process of what we call creating a uniformity of halakha. They wanted to create, instead of the vague laws of the Torah and people deciding what is permitted and what is forbidden, of course with some oral tradition that is there, they wanted to create a system. We want to create a system of reference so everybody could recall 1, 2, 3, 4, this is what you can do, those are what you cannot do, and that is where the 39 melachot come into place. But we'll talk about it tomorrow more in detail. Yeah.
On Shabbat, the people come to the rabbi